Funding for this CyberWire podcast is made possible in part by LastPass. LastPass is an award-winning security solution that helps millions of individuals in over 70,000 organizations navigate their online lives easily and securely. Businesses can maximize productivity while still maintaining effortless, strong security with LastPass. LastPass can minimize risk and give your IT team a breakthrough integrated single sign-on, password management, and multi-factor authentication solution. The U.S. Justice Department takes down 27 domains being used by Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps. Booz Allen offers its take on the 2021 threatscape. Russia declares itself innocent of bad behavior in cyberspace, but many remain skeptical. Johannes Ullrich from SANS looks at supply chain risks and managed service providers. Our own Rick Howard speaks with Wired's Andy Greenberg about the recent Sandworm indictments. Silk Road's mission $1 billion appear to have been found, and the U.S. government is working on a forfeiture action. From the CyberWire studios at Data Tribe, I'm Dave Bittner with your CyberWire summary for Friday, November 6, 2020. The U.S. Department of Justice this week announced that it had taken down 27 domains Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps had used to distribute propaganda and disinformation. Many of the domains represented themselves as belonging to legitimate news outlets, but all were determined to be run by the IRGC and to be illegally seeking to exert a covert influence on public opinion in the U.S. and elsewhere. The warrant cites violations of the International Emergency and Economic Powers Act and the Iranian Transactions and Sanctions Regulations. The Justice Department's announcement also notes that the IRGC's provisions of material support to Hezbollah, Hamas, and the Taliban earned it a place on the Treasury Department's list of specially designated nationals. That, too, exposes the group to U.S. legal action. John C. Demers, Assistant Attorney General for National Security, explained the rationale for the takedown as follows, quote, "As long as Iran's leaders are trying to destabilize the world through the state sponsorship of terrorism and the taking of hostages, we will continue to enforce U.S. sanctions and take other legal steps to counter them." Booz Allen Hamilton has published its expectations for the cyber threat landscape in the coming year. They arrange their predictions on a novelistic armature. The efforts of a fictional CEO, Dakota Alexander, of a fictional Fortune 500 company, to deal with a major cyber incident. The report opens much the way the Cyberspace Solarium Commission introduced its report, with a fictional account of a Washington hellscape created by a massive attack on the Internet of Things. The resemblance is not accidental. Both intros are by Peter Singer, political scientist turned novelist. Booz Allen sees 8 main trends in cyber threats. We might group them into 3 categories: the success-inspired, the pandemic-driven, and the technologically enabled. The success-inspired trend will be marked by increased attention to and experimentation with various extortion and ransomware criminal business models. There are 3 pandemic-driven trends Booz Allen sees shaping the threat. First, both criminals and nation-states will devote more attention to attacking the delivery and shipping sectors. The increased importance of these businesses makes them high-value targets. Second, COVID-19 tracing apps and their supporting ecosystem present a new attack surface for criminals, spies, and even low-life trolls. Third, healthcare's shift to a remote delivery model is likely to be an enduring one, and criminals can be expected to go after telehealth systems and remote healthcare monitoring devices will become more attractive targets. And finally, technological advance in cloud migration, artificial intelligence, and 5G networks will also shape the way threat actors develop and service their targets. The first trend is the likelihood that cloud-based development environments will become a vector for supply chain attacks. Second, as artificial intelligence becomes more pervasive across industries, machine learning systems and methods will become high payoff targets. Third, 5G networks will complicate the attack surface industrial control systems present and give attackers a fresh advantage over defenders. Finally, the general public availability of 5G will enable attackers to find and exploit vulnerabilities in their victims' mobile devices. Each threat trend is accompanied by a set of recommendations for managing the risk the trend presents. The report closes with 3 general recommendations: don't become distracted, be proactive to be resilient, and have an incident response retainer in place. TASS is authorized to declare that, quote, Russia keeps facing claims of its destructive behavior in cyberspace which are groundless, end quote, and they have that straight from President Vladimir Putin. He's particularly miffed at reports of attempts to meddle with foreign elections. The rhetorical technique employed here is unlikely insistence. Quote, there are continuing claims against us on our alleged hyperactivity in information space, meddling in elections and so on, which are absolutely unfounded, Mr. Putin said, and he repeated his calls for more cooperation with the U.S. on approving a comprehensive program for practical measures for resetting relations with Russia in using IT technologies. He also called for a full-scale bilateral regular interdepartmental dialogue on key issues of maintaining international security at a high level. Russia has indeed been quieter during recent elections in various countries than it was a few years ago, but quieter doesn't mean totally silent. Consider Reuters' recent Fancy Bear sighting and its account of GRU activities against some U.S. Democratic Party email accounts. And in any case, the Bears' lower profile is at least as likely attributable to their adversaries' deterrence by denial as it is to any putative Russian self-restraint. Some of the targets, Reuters says, include the Democrat-aligned Center for American Progress as well as the Indiana and California Democratic parties. There's no particular evidence of notable success in these campaigns, but then not all pawing gets the honey. The Silk Road online contraband criminal market was taken down 7 years ago, its proprietor Ross Ulbricht now serving time in a U.S. federal prison. But the Silk Road legal story has continued. This week, the U.S. Justice Department filed a judicial forfeiture action seeking control over more than $1 billion in Bitcoin squirreled away in a crypto wallet associated with Silk Road. Someone, a hacker known only as Individual X, succeeded in exfiltrating a lot of altcoin from Silk Road wallets, and as the price of Bitcoin rose, so did Individual X's account. The Internal Revenue Service noticed, Treasury took the Bitcoin, and now Justice is filing for forfeiture to bring some closure to the affair. So it appears, as Wired observes, that Justice may finally have an answer to its billion-dollar question: where did all the money go? If anyone needs a refresher on Silk Road and its celebrity impresarios, the online site Free Ross Ulbricht describes Mr. Ulbricht as an entrepreneur passionate about free markets and privacy, which is one way of looking at it. His hacker name, we recall, was the Dread Pirate Roberts, an homage to the Princess Bride. The U.S. Justice Department's view of Mr. Ulbricht's career may be viewed at justice.gov, and it's decidedly less rosy than the free marketing privacy hawk Free Ross describes. Silk Road trafficked a lot of drugs and made a great deal of money from it. And finally, our long period of uncertainty over leadership, over succession, and over the orderly transfer of authority seems finally to have reached a satisfying denouement. Major League Baseball has approved John Angelos as the successor to his father Peter as control person of the Baltimore Orioles. That is, the executive responsible for the club as a whole. So take heart, Baltimore, and talk birdie to me. It's November, so let the hot stove leagues begin. And now, a word from our sponsor, Threat Connect. Designed by analysts but built for the entire team, Threat Connect's intelligence-driven security operations platform is the only solution available today with intelligence, automation, analytics, and workflows in a single platform. Every day, organizations worldwide use Threat Connect as the center of their security operations to detect, respond, remediate, and automate. With all of your knowledge in one place, enhanced by intelligence, enriched with analytics, driven by workflows, you'll dramatically improve the effectiveness of every member of the team. Want to learn more? Check out their newest ebook, SOAR Platforms. Everything you need to know about security, orchestration, automation, and response. The book talks about intelligence-driven orchestration, decreasing time to response and remediation with SOAR, and ends with a checklist for a complete SOAR solution. Download it at threatconnect.com/cyberwire. That's threatconnect.com/cyberwire. And we thank ThreatConnect for sponsoring our show. Following the recent U.S. indictments of several Russian nationals associated with the Sandworm adversary group, our own chief analyst Rick Howard reached out to Wired writer and author of the book Sandworm, Andy Greenberg, for his take on these developments.
Andy Greenberg is a senior writer for Wired, responsible for security, privacy, and information freedom, and author of the most excellent book, Sandworm, A New Era of Cyberwar and the Hunt for the Kremlin's Most Dangerous Hackers. Welcome to the show, Andy.
Thank you, Rick. I'm glad to be here.
Now, we asked you to join us today because just this past Monday, 19 October 2020, the United States Department of Justice unsealed charges, including computer fraud and conspiracy, against 6 of the hackers who allegedly are part of the hacker crew behind the cyber operations you so clearly articulated in your book. And we thought you might have some insight about what all this means. So thank you for doing that, kind of giving us a guidebook for how to understand all this stuff.
Yeah, reading this indictment, to me, it's like very gratifying. In a way, it's a kind of closure on years of tracking this group that, at times, it felt like I was in a pretty small club of security researchers who even believed that this was one group that was carrying out all of these attacks. And now seeing, 6 names and 6 faces being held accountable for this, it's like a nice coda to the story.
All right, so let's talk about that. Can you, maybe not everybody has read your book yet, and by the way, I highly recommend that they do, but can you give us a thumbnail sketch of what the book was about, and then we can talk about what the indictments mean?
Sandworm is a group of Russian hackers that since late 2015 or so have carried out what I think is, you could say is the first full-blown cyber war. Starting in Ukraine, they attacked pretty much every part of Ukrainian society with these data-destructive attacks that hit media and the private sector and government agencies, and then ultimately the electric utilities, causing the first ever blackouts triggered by cyber attacks. Sandworm hit Ukraine's power grid not once but twice in late 2015 and then again in late 2016. And then finally, this Ukrainian cyber war that Sandworm was waging essentially in the middle of 2017 kind of exploded out to the rest of the world with this cyber attack called NotPetya, a piece of malware that, a worm, a self-propagating piece of fake ransomware that was actually just a destructive attack that spread from Ukraine to the rest of the world and took down a whole bunch of multinational companies, medical record systems, and hospitals across the United States, and ultimately cost $10 billion in global damages, the worst cyber attack in history by a good measure. So the story of Sandworm is kind of a detective story about the security researchers that, across the private sector. I focus on a few different people who were kind of trying to track this group and figure out who they are and try to warn the world that this Ukrainian cyber war was soon going to spill out and hit us too. And then that is exactly what happened. And when that happens, the book kind of switches from a detective story to a disaster story. And I track the effects of NotPetya across the world as it kind of causes this wave of devastation.
So why the indictments now?
I can't say that I have a definitive answer. I mean, I've asked Justice Department officials if this is about the election, and they say no, that this is just how long it takes to really get the evidence of who was at the keyboard doing what, and have the basis for an indictment that'll hold up in court. Although it'll probably never really go to trial. These guys will never actually see the inside of a courtroom. But it's hard to imagine that there's not some sense of the election in the calculus here, because we know that the GRU, another part of the GRU, at least APT 28's Fancy Bear, Microsoft has already warned that they were targeting hundreds of organizations over the last year, trying to breach them, and that many of them were political consultancies and political campaigns associated with the election, and that they were probably trying to do a kind of hack and leak operation as they did in 2016. So it seems to me like, I mean, maybe it wasn't even intended to, but I kind of guessed that it was, that this indictment sends a message to the GRU that cut it out. Like if you were going to do something for this election, just remember, we are going to catch you. We're going to hold you responsible, just as we did for these older attacks.
I know there's all that calculus, and it's easy for armchair cyber warriors like you and me to, take pot shots at it. But is there anything you could say about that? Is there, you could see reasons why governments would be reluctant to call out the Russians on this?
Well, I think you're right. Like it's, I am an armchair cyber warrior at best. And I know that this stuff is hard. And I really, as I was saying, like the criminal indictment is a remarkable document. And I'm amazed at the amount of work that clearly went into it. But I do think that like we have to hold our public officials accountable, and we have to hold them accountable to holding Russia accountable. It doesn't seem that hard to me to put together the forensic evidence that I could see that these attacks were carried out by Russia and make a public statement about that. I often use this Lord of the Rings analogy. Like this ring is so powerful that like everybody wants it for themselves and nobody wants to do the hard work of carrying it to Mount Doom and destroying it.
Oh man, that is the best analogy I have ever heard. We've definitely seen the escalation of this idea of continuous low-level cyber conflict. Okay, in the early part of the decade, was minor annoyances, but the NotPetya and everything else after seems to be more significant. So Andy Greenberg, thank you for being on the show. Everybody go read his book. It's fantastic. Thanks for taking the time with us.
Thank you, Rick. This was a fun conversation.
Our own Rick Howard speaking with Sandworm author Andy Greenberg. You can hear more of this interview on our website. It's part of CyberWire Pro. And now, a word from our sponsor, Verizon. Mitigate the risks and realize the benefits of digital transformation with the help of Verizon, a leader in cybersecurity managed and professional services for nearly 2 decades. From secure cloud computing solutions to advanced detection and response capabilities, Verizon helps secure data, networks, and infrastructure of many of the world's best-known organizations. Their annual Data Breach Investigations report is considered the gold standard of cybercrime research. And Verizon's leadership in network, wireless, and IoT connectivity makes it uniquely capable of protecting the ever-expanding attack surface. Let Verizon help you optimize your defenses and achieve the maximum return on your security investments. Learn more at verizonenterprise.com/products/security. And joining me once again is Johannes Ullrich. He is the Dean of Research at the SANS Technology Institute. He's also the host of the ISC Stormcast podcast. Johannes, it's great to have you back. You and your team have been looking at supply chain risks, specifically when it comes to managed service providers. What sort of information do you have for us today?
Yeah, this was really prompted by an event recently where one large managed service provider, Tyler Technology, was breached. And we had some of their customers contact us because they found remote access tools installed on some of their systems. And of course, the big question then was, are these tools that Tyler Technologies legitimately installed? Or due to the breach, passwords and so were leaked? Is this something that an attacker installed after breaching Tyler Technologies and retrieving these passwords from them?
So how do you explore something like this? What path did you all go down?
Yeah, so of course, first you look at what tool is being used. And now the tool that was installed here, that remote access tool, was by all means a commercial, legitimate tool. And then, of course, it gets even more tricky. Now, this is something that a managed service provider would certainly install on your systems because they do need that kind of access to your system. They need to be able to remote install, remote monitor, and do all of these things to it. So what it really comes down to is what I'm always calling is now who's watching the watchers here. You have these companies that are managing your networks. Often they also provide security functions for your network. There are various levels of service that you can purchase. But you need some kind of controls around how they're doing that, what they're doing. So you should have some communication channels set up where they will tell you these are the kind of remote access tools we are going to install on your systems. In particular, if you're still retaining some security monitoring function, you need to know that in order to understand that this new communication you see in and out of your network is legitimate, that's due to this particular tool that the vendor installed.
Yeah, I was going to say, I mean, it seems like it's not unreasonable to expect a high level of communication with these folks, especially if they're going to have intimate access to your network.
Yeah, exactly. And that's really important that you also monitor them based on this. You can't sort of totally relinquish control of your network. You need to still retain sort of some kind of monitoring, some kind of access, where you, like I said, watch the watchers, you're checking up on them. And this is not necessarily an adversarial thing that you're doing. It's not that you don't trust them. It's just that you need to know who else is in your network but that managed service provider. Because an attacker managing your network, as we sometimes even call it, is probably acting very similar as this managed service provider. And you need to be able to tell the two apart.
Well, in this particular case, how did things play out? What did you discover in the end?
In the end, we discovered here that this was a legitimate install, apparently, but this is actually still somewhat in progress. I don't think we have a complete conclusion yet, in part because everything is still a little bit in flux here with this breach as well.
All right. Well, word to the wise, for sure. Johannes Ullrich, thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
Thanks to all of our sponsors for making the CyberWire possible, especially our supporting sponsor, Proofpoint's Observe It, the leading people-centric insider threat management solution. Learn more at observeit.com. And that's the CyberWire. For links to all of today's stories, check out our daily briefing at thecyberwire.com. And for professionals and cybersecurity leaders who want to stay abreast of this rapidly evolving field, sign up for CyberWire Pro. It'll save you time and keep you informed. It's the breakfast of champions. Listen for us on your Alexa smart speaker, too. Don't miss this weekend's Research Saturday episode and my conversation with Craig Williams from Cisco Talos. We're going to be discussing PoetRat, malware targeting the public and private sector in Azerbaijan. That's Research Saturday. Check it out. The CyberWire podcast is proudly produced in Maryland out of the startup studios of Data Tribe, where they're co-building the next generation of cybersecurity teams and technologies. Our amazing CyberWire team is Elliot Peltzman, Guru Prakash, Stefan Vaziri, Kelsey Bond, Tim Nodar, Joe Kerrigan, Carol Terrio, Ben Yellen, Nick Valecki, Gina Johnson, Bennett Moe, Chris Russell, John Petrick, Jennifer Iben, Rick Howard, Peter Kilpie, and I'm Dave Bittner. Thanks for listening. We'll see you back here next week. It's time to take a moment to tell you about our sponsor, Tanium. Today, we rely on endpoints for everything from remote work to mobile banking, telemedicine, and online learning. That's why managing and securing these endpoints has never been more important. Tanium provides unified endpoint management and security built for the world's most demanding IT environments, providing instant visibility, complete context, and rapid response. That's why all 6 branches of the U.S. Armed Forces and half of the Fortune 100 trust Tanium to protect their IT operations. Join Tanium at this year's Converge 2020 virtual event to learn about the latest advances in unified endpoint management and security, connect with industry peers, and hear directly from other leading technology partners like Google Cloud and Salesforce. Go to converge.tanium.com and enter promo code CyberWire to receive a 15% discount on a lab pass. And we thank Tanium for sponsoring our show.